Brett, so good to spend some time with you today. First off, congratulations on your new book, which is coming March 14th, Promoted. I got an advance copy, got the opportunity to read it. Thank you for that. And we're going to talk today about the book. But first off, Brett, tell me a little bit about your background and what inspired you to write Promoted.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Carson. Really appreciate it. It's an honor and really humbled to be joining you on the podcast here. Uh, the reason I wrote this book is so I had done really well in sales for a number of years, 7, 8 years, had been a top producer in a couple different industries. And about that time in 2008, 2009, I had made the decision that I wanted to transition into sales leadership. And I didn't have a roadmap to follow. And it took me a long time to get there and a lot of trials and tribulations. And really, the reason I wrote this book is because I wish a book like this existed 14, 15 years ago when I was looking to make that transition. And I feel like if I had been given a roadmap like this, it would have ultimately accelerated my ability to get promoted into leadership roles faster, would have been able to do better sooner, and ultimately, they're just when you look around, there's just aren't that many books like this that really get into the tactical nitty gritty of what it takes and the steps to take. And so that was really the reason that I wrote it, and excited for it to launch here in a couple weeks, and really really happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, I love it. And what jumped out at me, Brett, was just how comprehensive and thorough it was. I mean, I coach a lot of sellers, and I write, on a blog and things of that nature. And a lot of the things that I'm speaking about are those things that I wish I had known back earlier in my sales career that I think will be of value to other folks. And so I love the fact that you've created this roadmap and that it is so comprehensive and thorough. I mean, it covers a lot of topics, building relationships, and then, like you said, kind of building that roadmap. Something else you pointed out in the book, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but like it doesn't, the first time we go for a leadership job doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get it either, right? So
Yep.
I'd love to get a feel for what do you think is one of the most or some of the more important aspects of becoming a successful leader?
Yeah, no, and you bring up a really good point that I think is an important thing for people to consider is if you go for a leadership role and you don't get it, it can actually be a good thing. And in my case, it was. I talk about a couple of the early leadership roles that I applied for, didn't get early on, and in hindsight, it was probably the best thing for me because I wasn't ready and I wouldn't have been as successful. And so, but I will say this, for people that want to transition into leadership roles, a couple things that are really important to consider and that you have to consider when you're making that decision. The first thing is why. You've got to be really clear on the why in terms of why you want to go into leadership. And you need to talk to people that are in leadership positions and really get an understanding of what the day-to-day looks like, the daily challenges, and really what that picture looks like. Because I think a lot of people get really caught up in the idea of leadership and maybe the title and the perception of what they think it is. And then once they understand what it really is, they understand that maybe it's not for them. And so I would say the first thing is that's the first thing you have to do is really get an understanding of what leadership's going to look like, especially within the company you work for and what that opportunity is going to be. But then the other thing is, I would say the biggest thing you can start doing is to really think through, say, when I am a leader, when I do have my own team, when I'm leading people, what do I want the culture of that team to be like? How do I want people to respond? How do I want to be perceived by others? And really ask yourself, are the steps that I'm taking, how I'm presenting myself, how I'm interacting with people, do they currently align with that? And if they don't, then, obviously there's some changes that need to be made. And then I think the third thing is, and this is something that never ends, even when you do get into a leadership role, I think that the best leaders they continue to learn. They continue to learn, they continue to grow, they look for opportunities. They read a lot of leadership books. They listen to podcasts, attend conferences, sometimes get executive coaching. And so, I think that's something else that you have to consider is that you've really got to invest in what leadership looks like and what it means to be a leader. Um, and Carson, you know this, but a lot of times in leadership, there's not always a playbook for situations that come up. Like you can't even script some of the stuff when once you're leading teams and managing people. There's challenges that people go into, have happen in their day-to-day personal lives. Sometimes those challenges obviously can affect their work, and you really have to have a good framework of, what's the culture you want to create? How do you want people to interact with you? And what's the right level of empathy where, you do want people to know you really care about them. But at the same time, there are business objectives that have to be accomplished, and those don't go away, even if someone has something happen in their personal life. So I think for people trying to go into leadership, those would be the three things I would focus on right out the gate.
That is so good, Brett. At the end of the day, you're working with and for people. You
Yeah.
get paid to serve and protect these folks. And the other thing is you've got to really be intentional about what and why you're getting into leadership. I love that you called that out. But you're not entitled to leadership just because you perform well. You're not entitled to go into a management role. I've had people before that, oh, I've been here 2, 3 years, so it's the next logical step. No, it's not. You have to be very intentional in why you're making that move. And the other thing too, because I know a lot of what your audience is here is high achievers, and I want to talk about that here in a second because also a high achiever does not necessarily a great leader make. You're going to have less control. You're not going to impart your will or your way on these folks. You have to unlock their barriers to success. You have to help them see around corners, not just telling them to do things the way you did it as a high achiever. And you might make less money. You probably will actually than your top achievers as a leader. So you've got to be very prepared for those types of things. The other thing too is going after these jobs. I've been very fortunate in my career. I've had several promotions in my life, but I didn't get every job I ever went out for. I didn't get every promotion, and sometimes that is a blessing. And I'll tell you, if it's not this one, maybe it's the next one. It's the one after that. You've got to learn from each of these experiences, and you come back to the table better the next time. Ask for feedback. If you go for a promotion and you don't get it, be sure to ask for feedback from any hiring managers that are involved. And I love that you highlighted spending time with people that are doing these roles. Find those aspirational mentors or other people that are doing those roles so you can get a feel for, hey, what should I be prepared for? Is this the right decision for me to make? I think that's super important that we double down there. As you mentioned, this is all about speaking to high achievers that are thinking about going into leadership. So define that. What is a high achiever that should maybe be thinking about or is thinking about leadership, and why is that audience particularly important as an audience for this book?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And actually, it's probably the least sexy topic that I talk about in the book. But when you open it up and you read chapter one, the title of chapter one is Crush Your Current Job. And to me, if you're thinking about wanting to do more, and even if it's not leadership, maybe it's working in another department or trying to make a transition either to marketing or something else. If you're not meeting the responsibilities of your current job, then that to me is the ultimate prerequisite here. None of the rest of this really matters. And there's a few different reasons for that. I think when I think through, especially transitioning to leadership roles, three things you really have to consider is credibility, the responsibility of it, and then handling life changes. That's something that's real. I touched on it earlier, but to me, there is a credibility factor that if you're going to lead a team, you're going to have a built-in credibility where they want to know that you have a competence level where you can support them, you can help them, you can either, you've walked in their shoes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the exact products or service that they are selling, but in this case of being promoted, oftentimes it is. And so, you need to have that credibility. Another thing is the responsibility of it. If you're not meeting the responsibility of your current role, what happens when you now have 8 other people in 8 territories, or however many people reporting to you, and a number that's probably, or a quota that's 8 to 10 times larger than your own individual number? So, think through it as a senior leader. If you're a senior leader, if you're a CEO, you're a VP of sales making a decision on who you want leading your teams, uh, if you can't handle the responsibility and be accountable to this number once it's smaller, then that's a big risk for them to be able to promote someone into something, bigger. And then, I talked about handling life changes, and that's something that's just, it's real. People have personal lives, especially the higher up people go, and, they have kids, they're married, there's responsibilities that come with that. We all have to balance multiple responsibilities. I don't really like the word work-life balance, but I would say managing multiple responsibilities of it. And so when I say high achiever, I say, I would say that's someone that is meeting or exceeding their current objectives. That's someone that has a good team approach, that is a good member of the team. They're trying to help other people on the team. They're an example of what good leadership looks like. And they're also trying to help the company and try to network up the ladder with senior leaders of the company to understand what are the big objectives, what we're trying to accomplish here, and what are the challenges that those senior leaders are trying to work through to get the company to the next level. If you really want to connect with senior leaders, that I would say is the number one thing that you can do, is try to get understanding of what's on their radar, what they're trying to accomplish, what the challenges are, and then, meet the expectations of your current job, but really try to think through how you can lead through example, by example, and how you can help them work through those. You'll be on their radar, and that's a key ingredient. I think that, those are the people that they want to promote into leadership roles.
You said so many very important things. So for everybody watching or listening, if you haven't picked up on this already, like this is a must read if you want to get promoted. And I don't use those terms lightly. As I said, I've gone for a lot of promotions in my day, and I wish I had had what Bret has put together here. Frankly, the rigor is so much more intense at that level. Often you're a conduit, right? You're a mouthpiece. You've got to take the message from above, often whether you agree with it or not. You've got to translate that to your team. You also have to keep your ear to the ground and, take in what your team and your customers are telling you so that you can ultimately relay that up the chain. That can be very challenging. You've got to find the right diplomatic way to do that. You've got to learn to play the game. I remember early on, I was in leadership roles in my 20s, right? And compare and contrast that today. I carry myself a lot differently. I play the game a lot differently. I'm a lot more diplomatic. And, I understand now when I was told in my 20s, like, hey, you need to get more polish and discipline. At the time, I was like, oh, you're wrong. But now I know exactly what they meant. Now, you said something else, and it really stuck with me, Brett. Just, step one, right? You got to crush the gig that you're in. I always tell people, you're going for a role, become the obvious choice. But go in knowing that even if you're the obvious choice, you may not get it. So control the controllables, controlling your brand. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about here in a second, is kind of that brand element. But credibility is so key. I carried a bag for a long time. I can walk through a lot of and navigate through a lot of scenarios with my team, and we handle sometimes gnarly situations, and I can point back and connect the dots backwards and say, hey, this is what I did when I faced something similar before. It either worked or it didn't work, but I learned from it. And, to be able to be credible in that space is so important as you're leading your team. You want that ability to be credible with your team, because ultimately you're trying to influence their actions and you're trying to help them. You're trying to help them find the resources that they needed to be successful. You get paid to be their advocate. You get paid to be their evangelist. If it's somebody that's a high performer, you're also trying to build a succession plan. You want to build a bench. You want to get people promoted. You want to build a team culture that is going to attract more talent and bring success and to win. So those things are very important. But I liked what you said too about work-life balance. I heard a term recently, work-life rhythm. And so, it's going to ebb and flow. Sometimes you're going to be heavy on the work. Sometimes you're going to be heavy on the home, and you've earned that. So I think that's super important. I always try to develop a brand of being a problem eliminator. I would listen to what leadership was saying was their top problem, and I would go out and find a way to fix it. And that brand has served me well over time. You talk about the importance of intentionally building a brand, Brett. What advice would you give to somebody who maybe is just now starting to really develop their personal brand and they have aspirations for leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest advice I would give someone is to really think through, and the question I actually ask in the book is, would the CEO of the company hand you the keys tomorrow? And obviously, I think in most people, when you think of it from a skill level or an experience level, probably not, but when you start thinking through from a character and responsibility level, would he or she do that? And, I think that's something that I really got wrong the first several years of my career. And you think through it, and this is, probably a good topic for this group. High level salespeople, if you're a top salesperson, you've got a lot of respect. And at times, you almost feel like you can walk on water and get away with almost anything, and a lot of salespeople, they get that they get that attitude, and then salespeople bring a lot of money in for companies, and it's natural. I fell into that trap in my early and mid 20s. But then, when you start thinking of transitioning into leadership roles, and what are some of the qualities that a CEO or a VP of sales would want to see from a leader? The party guy, that's the sales guy, that's fun, that's closing down every happy hour. That's not necessarily the person that you want leading all of your teams. And so that was a big transition that I had to make. I ended up not making it really intentionally. I ended up getting married and stopped going out and
That happens.
partying and drinking so much. So fortunately that influence, my wife rubbed off on me on that influence. But in hindsight, that was something I wish I would have learned a lot earlier. Is if thinking through where I want my career to go, who are the people that are watching me, and who are the people that are going to be deciding the future fate of my career. And if it's CEOs, if it's VP of sales, yeah, they're going to be cool to you at happy hours, and they're going to appreciate the revenue that you bring to the company. But if you have aspirations of leading and being on their leadership team, well, then I would encourage people to be very cognizant of how they want themselves to be perceived. So, yeah, I think intentionally building your brand and thinking through, how you go about doing that. That's something that's always got to be on the forefront of your mind. And I think a lot of people
Yeah.
just don't think about it, especially earlier in their career. They're doing well, they're making good money, everything's good, life's good. It's easy to be really short-sighted. And I would just tell people, if you have aspirations of doing more beyond just being a high-producing salesperson, then really think through that piece and make sure that when you're at company events, you're in front of customers or whoever, that you're representing yourself, not just in a good way for the role you're in now, but any roles that you're hoping to gain in the future.
Spot on. When I was reading Promoted, that piece definitely spoke to me because it resonated with the me of my 20s when I was just a young, very confident salesperson, and you could stay out all night and then hit the phones in the morning somehow. I know that I couldn't take it now. Plus, thankfully, it sounds
Yeah.
like we both had wives that came along and saved us from that life. So think about it. Like, look, you want to get on the radar, like you said, of these executives that ultimately are going to make the decision, but you've got to have the brand that de-risks their decision. That's it. And I loved your analogy about, is the CEO going to hand you the keys? You talked earlier about, and you talk about this in the book, the effective, the fun, the high performing team culture. And frankly, the more I talk to sales leaders today, like a true vibrant sales culture is not the norm. How do
Yeah.
you how do you build a successful team culture? What do you think are the key components?
Well, I think that the biggest key component is really creating an environment as a sales leader where people feel like they can speak up and voice concerns. And to me, I think two-way dialogue is really important. You mentioned it earlier. Uh, Obviously there's a vision and objectives from above that we need to execute as sales teams for the company, right? There's also a reality of things that these sales jobs are not easy in any industry you're in. There's challenges, they're hard. That's why top salespeople, are not everyone can do this because it's hard. And so I think as a leader, one of the hardest things to do that, and it takes a little while once you do transition into leadership, is to really get a good balance of being able to lead and direct and express the vision of what's important to execute and how the company wants it executed. But then, almost the how and the how we handle challenges and how we work through things. That's where the best leaders build a collaborative team environment, whether it's team meetings, conference calls, different things like that. You really need to try to encourage as much interaction from your sales team as you possibly can. And I think sometimes that's tough depending on different situations. Some teams are really high performing. Sometimes you walk into leadership roles where maybe you're taking over the bottom producing team and you may not have any high achievers yet, but there's somebody in the company that is producing. And I think really connecting with those people, getting them to come share with your team, model best practices, give your team access and help connect the dots for your team to high achievers to show them that even if they haven't unlocked things for themselves yet, that it's possible and it's possible for them. So I think really creating that environment where people feel safe to say, hey, I get what we're trying to do, but here's how I'm trying to work through this. And I'm getting this challenge here. I think that's something in just listening and really hearing people out and trying to help provide support and resources. And there's also no substitute for getting in the field with people. I've been in medical device sales for the last almost 20 years now. And so, as a sales leader, even to this day, I think the most valuable thing that you can do is get in the field, get in the car with someone, and show them not only are you willing to get in the trenches and still get in front of customers and do the work and help them at that level, but also just connect and try to get to know people and try to understand, not only how we help them produce in their current role, but what do they want to do in the future? And that's something I think another component of great leadership is really trying to develop other leaders, trying to get an understanding of what people want to do in their career long term. And I think bad leaders are sometimes afraid to do that because they think they want to keep all their team intact and they want to keep their team together for a few years and create this team that's going to continue to succeed and grow. But the reality is, if you have the top achievers that you want on your team, you're going to want those people to want to do more in their career. And it's up to you as a leader to really create that development path for them, and then also create a path where you can help backfill them. And you think of it like my favorite coach of all time is Bill Walsh, the old coach of the 49ers. They won some Super Bowls with him, but I think the more valuable aspect of what he's done is you look at all of these coaches in the NFL nowadays, several now that are head coaches, some that are retired now, that coached under him in those years in San Francisco, and then coaches that came from them. And so I think, if you really want to leave a legacy as a leader, how many other leaders you produce as a leader, to me, is the number one most important thing you can do.
God, magic. I love it, Bret. One of the things too, and we'll talk about this here in a second as we kind of come to a close, is the sports piece of all this. We can't keep a football team here in St. Louis, so I've always been a lifelong 49ers fan. And I know we talked about our commonalities. I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area as a kid, and so loved the A's and the Giants, but I've always been a Cardinal fan. We've been very blessed in that space. You said something super important here, and I want to really double down on it. Look, my biggest challenge in making the transition to leadership was kind of moving away from that hero role to the hero maker role. And that's one of the things as you prep for this, you've got to be ready for it, and I think when you're asking yourself, hey, am I ready to make the move from, individual contributor to leader? Am I ready to be the hero maker instead of the hero? You've got to build a foundation of trust and transparency early on with your team. I love how you said how you encourage them to spend time together as well as they gel and build that culture. I've always had players only time where, they hear enough from me, spend time together as a team, sharing war stories, best practices, form like organizational betterment committees, and then obviously give me that feedback if there's high level feedback of things that I might be able to change these things really help you to build that trust and transparency because you're fostering time for them to spend together. Don't make autonomous decisions or knee-jerk decisions as a leader. A lot of the changes that I would make, I never came in and made changes early on, like with a team. I'd observe, I'd listen, I'd get feedback, get a feel for what was working and what wasn't, and I would want to make them part of the decision-making process if we made
Yeah.
changes to the playing field. Um, Last question here, Brad, and then I'd love to get a feel for anything else that you want to share as we kind of come to a close. But something I really loved about Promoted was it's just rife with stories, right? You gave a lot of very clear examples of just different scenarios of people going into leadership scenarios and attempting to be promoted, and it was very relatable in that regard. And furthermore, you shared about your passion for baseball, and I'm curious, how might that have influenced your approach to not only leadership but also writing the book?
Yeah, well, I think so I grew up playing baseball. I mean, played since I was 5 or 6 years old. And it definitely has influenced my sales success. I mean, when you think about it, the best players in baseball only succeed 3 out of 10 times. So you're
That's
failing
right. That's a Hall of
70% of the
Fame
time.
career,
Yeah,
by the
and
way.
you were
That's
one of
yeah.
the best, and you fail, far more than you succeed. And I think that so obviously, there's a lot of rejection in sales, and sales is hard. And so I think that's part of that background, that willingness to, even if you go out and things don't go well for a day, knowing that you get another opportunity the next day, playing, being part of a team, and just that overall grit and emotional stability that you have to develop as a high level baseball player. I think that's really naturally transitioned into success in sales for me. The motivation for writing the book, I'll tell you, I don't know how much baseball factored in, but I was a journalism major in college. That was my plan. I went to college to play baseball and figured, all right, I'm gonna major in journalism, and when my playing career is done, I'm gonna be on TV hopefully someday, and ultimately then got into this world of sales, and I realized, wow, you could do a lot better. The road to success in sales is a lot quicker than getting blown off the side of the highway at 6 in the morning on the newscast, for a lot less money. So,
Yeah.
but I've always had a passion for journalism, and that's where I've gotten back to writing the books. Is I feel like I have a unique path that in some ways I've been really blessed in a lot of ways with how things have gone, but I also have a story that's not too dissimilar than where most people are at in their career, especially most salespeople and most top achievers. And what I've tried to do with my books, my first book and this one as well, is really think through, where was I at 12 to 15 years ago? And what are the things that the advice I wish I would have gotten at that time that could have helped me get to this place or farther sooner? And so, that's been my approach with this book, is really trying to think through, what's the advice, what's the roadmap that I wish I'd been given, and really, think through, how do I put that in writing and put it in stories that relate to people, and where people, they relate to it, and they're going to read it and say, oh, okay, this is tangible, actionable steps I can take that I can go do. Yeah, I think a lot of books, there's a lot of leadership books out there, but a lot of them, when you get into them, they're really thick on philosophy, and they're very philosophical, and there's not a lot of like to do, like what's the step I can take. And so this book, and I encourage people, if they've enjoyed hearing what we've talked about, it's available on Amazon. You can either find the link on my LinkedIn, or you can go to bretbarrie.com. That's Brett with one T, and then Barrie's Barrie. Either one of those places you can go, you can find the book. It's available for pre-order now through Amazon, and then it launches in all formats March 14th. So if you like what you've heard today and you want to check out the book, I'd be honored. But yeah, that's what I've done, is try to tell it in ways where people can relate to the stories, and they relate to the advice, and they walk away with just some action items they could implement immediately.
And it's well worth it. If you want to be promoted, and I can just tell you this from experience, it's well worth the read. Definitely check it out. Bret Barrie, Promoted. Brett, anything else you want to add or throw in before we sign off today? This was great.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you again, Carson. I mean, it's an honor to be able to join you on this podcast. I've, read your books, followed your work for quite a while now, and it's an honor to be here and to speak to your audience. So thanks again for having me.
My pleasure. This was a blast, and just the credibility just exudes from you. I love the just the raw authenticity too of just talking about where you've been in your career, very relatable stories, and the realizations that you've had along the way. I think really that's the nobility in being able to teach and coach. So thank you for spending some time with me here today. And hopefully our audience can check out Promoted when it comes out March 14th. Thanks so much.